All right, welcome everybody to our February Fireside Chat. My name is Kirk Hanson. I'm the Director of Forestry for the Northwest Natural Resource Group. This is an ongoing series of evening conversations about topics relating to small woodlands management. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight's topic is wildlife, and it's a topic that we've covered at least twice during previous Fireside Chats. So if you are interested in looking at some of our previous coverings of this topic, you can get onto our YouTube channel and look for the prior Fireside Chats on wildlife and also Fireside Chats that cover a broad range of topics. Tonight, I'm going to share three different wildlife habitat restoration projects that I'm working on. And I wanted to share these as a way of kind of talking about my thought process for evaluating a site and deciding, how to do habitat restoration. An old teacher of mine said it's just as important to teach somebody how to think about doing something as it is how to do something, because once you have the thought process, you can apply that to any kind of problem or any kind of project that you're working on. So hopefully these three examples that I give you, provide kind of a good illustration for, again, how to evaluate a site and think about different ways of enhancing habitat on your land. So with that, I'm going to screen share and pull up a presentation. And
It's a fantastic picture.
yeah, there is a story behind this, as you might might guess. All right, I got too many things on my screen here. Okay, so I'm one of those foresters that learns as much from his mistakes as I do from other people's successes, and I'm also, being Norwegian, I'm genetically predisposed to take the most difficult path to a solution as is possible. And this photo is from a few years ago, shortly after we purchased our third forest near Bakota, Washington. And I was reopening some of the old logging trails, and these trails were covered with brush. As you can see behind me, there actually is an old logging road directly behind me, but it's covered in salmonberry and red elderberry and hazelnut and all sorts of things, not to mention all sorts of logs down across the roads. And so I was going in with a brush cutter and a chainsaw, opening this area up, and it was brutal work. Um, and one day when I was in there working on this, I had an evergreen intern come and join me, from an intern from the Evergreen State College, who was interested in learning about some of the work that I do, and specifically wanted to see my own family's forest land. And as we were standing on this road chatting, off in the brush, we heard this loud kind of rustling and crunching, and something clearly large was coming our direction through the brush. And so we stopped our conversation and turned to look. And just in the matter of a few seconds, I mean, really about as long as it took us to realize that something was bearing down upon us, out of the brush came this moderate sized black bear, and literally came tearing out of the brush within about 20 feet of us. Clearly didn't realize that we were in its path, and as soon as it saw us, it did that classic, put the paws down, came skidding to a halt. It looked at us, we looked at it, and I'm sure we were both contemplating, fight or flight in that moment. And I'm happy to be able to report that the old adage that bears and most predators are more afraid of humans than we are of them definitely bore some truth in this case. That bear turned tail and took off back into the brush in a different direction. And that was the first time I've had that kind of direct of I wouldn't say confrontation, but introduction anyway to a black bear, and definitely the first time for this evergreen intern. And fortunately, he was not too intimidated by the experience. Continued to work with me for the rest of the day, but definitely sent him home with the story to tell his friends. So there's a wildlife anecdote just to kick us off. So, like I mentioned, I want to share three projects with you that I'm working on currently. Um, one is both a prairie restoration and an oak woodlands restoration project just a little bit south of Olympia. The second is a riparian forest reforestation project also south of Olympia, and then a pollinator habitat project that I'm working on my own land. So starting out with the prairie and the oak woodland restoration project, I and my organization, the Northwest Natural Resource Group, are the foresters for the Skookumchuck Wildlife Habitat Management Area. It's a terrible acronym that doesn't allow is just not possible to be pronounced. But this is a offsite mitigation project for the Skookumchuck Dam, which you can see kind of on the right-hand side of the screen there. It's a dam that impounds water for a coal electricity plant a little ways south of it. And back, this is about 50 years ago in the 70s when the dam was built, our State Department of Fish and Wildlife required the company at the time to mitigate the impacts of the dam by setting aside about 1,000 acres for wildlife. So about 4 years ago, we were invited to take over management of the forest lands, which are about 600 of the roughly 1,000 acres. And we're given almost complete license to get creative with how we restored and managed wildlife habitat. And so one of the projects that we've just started working on is a oak and prairie restoration project. So just north of the Skookumchuck Road, there's this area that is a mix of open fields and some regenerating forest. And this particular area, it's down just above the floodplain of the river. But it was a site that was mined for gravel for the dam. This is one of those earthen dams. It's built out of gravel and I don't know what else, dirt, soil. But this is called the borrow pit, where they excavated gravel from it again about 50 years ago. And once they completed the dam, this site was just left to naturally revegetate on its own. And in the intervening 50 years or so, the trees that you can see from the aerial photo grew back in. But a significant portion of the site remained open or untreed, and in a sense, naturally developed already into kind of a prairie ecosystem. It's grasses and different forbs, a lot of non-native vegetation in there. So it's just a little different view of it. And I was looking at the site with the wildlife biologist that's the lead on this project, and we said, this might be a neat opportunity to reintroduce some oak savanna habitat, as well as enhance the prairie ecosystem there. If you go downriver, down the Skookumchuck River, you'll find native stands of oak trees, as well as camas prairies. So that was a good clue to us that this site, historically before it was mined for gravel, likely was in some kind of oak savanna prairie habitat. And so we thought, well, here might be a neat opportunity to bring some of that diminishing habitat type back to this particular site. And just kind of zooming in a little bit more, you can see the mosaic between the trees that have regenerated and the open grassy areas. So just literally yesterday, we had a biologist, restoration biologist, from the Center for Natural Lands Management, their organization both in Washington and California, join us, and they specialize in prairie restoration as well as oak habitat restoration. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to get an expert in and help us evaluate the site and come up with a plan for restoration. Very difficult site to work with. So first of all, like I mentioned, all the gravel was removed 50 years ago, and since that time, it's just naturally revegetated. So the site still has a lot of gravel. I took a shovel with me yesterday to stick it down in, just see what kind of soil we're working with, and there's just boy maybe a quarter inch of topsoil, and then it's all glacial cobbles underneath that. I mean, it took me probably about 3 minutes to dig, a planting hole for a tree. So I pity the crew that we hire to plant these oak trees for us, because they're going to have to come out with some crowbars and really maybe dynamite to create these planting holes for the oak trees. So punishing site, very little topsoil, very exposed both to sun and being open to the wind. Very droughty site, although in the wintertime there must be some kind of restrictive soil layer. There was some pooling water here and there. But in the summertime, all that drains very quickly and it becomes a very dry site. And it's for those reasons, again, that we thought that oak might do fairly well. Oak can actually do well during the winter on relatively wet sites, and then can tolerate the droughty conditions in the summer. Um, and so we came up with this plan to we identified 5 different sites, microsites, to plant the oaks, because we wanted to try them in different microclimates to see how they work. Some full exposure, some a little wetter than others, some tucked in amongst the existing trees and shrubs. And this is part of the experimental design, is just to see, in these different kind of microclimates with different conditions, how the oaks would do. So the purple polygons that you see are the oak planting sites. They total only about a little over 2.5 acres amongst all 5 of the locations. The blue polygons are mapped wetlands on the site. And the specifications that we came up for planting is across this little over 2.5 acres, we're going to plant about 250 oak seedlings. And that means spacing those oak seedlings out about 20 feet apart. So we're planting them, at a wide spacing, far wider than you would ever reforest a site. But keep in mind that oaks, as they grow up, develop very broad crowns. And so, we're kind of hedging our bets that if we do the planting well, we'll have good survival. And if we do, then the oaks should be spaced well enough apart that they can continue to grow indefinitely without competing with one another. 2 things we're going to do to try to help the oak survive through the summer droughts is we're going to place a cardboard mulch mat around each seedling, and then also place a donut of wood chips on top of that mulch mat. So the mulch mat will help suppress the grasses and some of the other forbs that already are on that site, and then the wood chips will act as a moisture barrier and also continue to serve as a weed barrier, grass barrier. Each tree will have a bamboo stake to identify it, and then a rigid plastic tube or tree protector to prevent browsing animals. There are deer and elk in the area, although I have every assumption that the elk will just see these tree tubes as candy wrappers and probably pull them off. So I imagine there'll be an ongoing maintenance issue there of continuing to replace the tree protectors. We're advised that for at least the first summer that we water the oaks about every 2 weeks or so, and then after that they should be well enough established that they can grow on their own. And we've come up with an estimate of about $2,500 per acre for the overall restoration cost. So that includes purchasing the seedlings, the mulch mats, the wood chips, the tree protectors, the bamboo stakes, as well as the labor for planting the trees. This does not include subsequent annual maintenance going forward of cutting back any competing vegetation or watering or what have you. So that's just the site restoration costs. And a little bit about the prairie restoration. We're going to choose 3 different sites. We thought about integrating them with the oaks, but we're going to separate, very likely separate them and have them be in discrete sites. and we've chosen about 7 acres, or in the process of choosing 7 acres across these 3 sites. And our approach, and this is again what we've been advised to do, is that we'll use an herbicide site prep. So since there's a lot of non-native vegetation on the site, we'll come in and broadcast spray and do that starting in March, do that about every 2 months throughout this year. And that way, as new vegetation continues to grow back, we expect there to be a latent seed bank in the soil there that each time plants resprout, we'll spray them. And the idea is basically to create a bare soil site that will be a good receptor site for the native pollinator species that we want to put in there. So then this fall, we'll broadcast the native prairie seeds, and there'll be a combination of annuals, self-seeding annuals, perennials. And then going forward, there'll be a combination of manual and herbicide maintenance, mostly just to make sure we keep knocking back the highly competitive non-native species and favor the native pollinator species. And then in year 10, our consultant is advising that we come in and do a controlled burn, which is something I've never been a part of. Observed it. This organization does this routinely in the South Puget Sound prairies. So we've got confidence that they have a good experience with that. We'll see if our client agrees with that process, but we have 10 years to warm them up to the idea. And again, the initial restoration costs for this kind of project are somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 per acre. That includes the herbicide site prep, broadcasting the seeds, and the ongoing kind of herbicide treatment throughout the first couple of years. So shifting a little bit, this is the same site, Skookumchuck Wildlife Habitat Management Area, just a little bit south of Olympia. And through the property runs the Skookumchuck River. You can kind of see its wiggly path coming down through the middle of the screen, just to the right of the farm fields there. And as the river passes through the farm fields, there's very little vegetation on either side of the river. Some areas are forested, but a lot of it's just either field or hedgerows of kind of mixed native and non-native species. A lot of Himalayan blackberry, snowberry, salmonberry, what have you, but not, for a river that supports several different species of salmon, very, very poor riparian habitat, with the farm fields basically coming right up to the river, steeply incised channel, lots of stream bank erosion, and kind of in desperate need of forest cover. And so we 2 years ago planted either side of the river with a combination of hardwoods and conifers, just a little closer view of the river there, where you can see again in some areas the fields come very close, and then there's just a lot of brush and kind of old hardwoods. And so we came up, we first actually mapped the vegetation next to the river and came up with 3 different treatment sites. The dark green are the farm fields that are immediately adjacent to the river. The yellow are hardwood stands, mostly alder, a little bit of cottonwood, that are adjacent to the river. And then the red are hedgerows, or just kind of areas that are dominated by shrubs, but there's no tree cover. And so we came up with 3 different treatment plans for each of those sites. For the fields, let's see here. Yes, for the fields where the grass is, we sprayed twice. Once in late summer, let the grass regrow a little bit, and then sprayed again in the fall. And we also sprayed the Himalayan blackberry, which is rampant throughout this riparian area. And then in the hardwood zones that were forested, in the shrub zones, we came in and manually cut in planting sites, 3-foot diameter circles. Did that with brush cutters and chainsaws. And then planted these sites. The fields that were had no vegetation other than grass, we planted at a really high density, about 8 by 8 spacing, which is equivalent to about 680 trees per acre, and a real mix of hardwoods and conifers. We put in alder and cottonwood and ash and quaking aspen. For conifers, put in Douglas fir, cedar, hemlock, spruce, lodgepole pine, valley ponderosa pine, and mix them all up. As you can see on this photo here, all the blue rigid tubes are protecting hardwoods, and the yellow mesh tubes are protecting cedar. All the other conifers we didn't cage, but with every tree, we also put a mulch mat down and then put a bamboo stake to aid in future identification. And the total cost for just planting the site, labor, all the materials, was about $2,700 per acre. So since this site now is a couple of years under our belt, some lessons learned. The mulch mats were a nightmare. When we put them out, especially in the fields, they were stapled down in the corners. But in that exposed site, when the winds came along, the winds just ripped the mats up, wrapped them around the tree tubes, and rendered them irrelevant as far as any kind of a mulch function goes. I was also told by one of my foresters that I had asked to go out and do a seedling survival. He told me that where the fabric did stay intact was a perfect breeding site for wasps. So that was just another issue that we faced there. And as was expected, there was pretty high mortality in the first year. Planting into farm fields is one of the most punishing environments to try to reforest. And the mortality, we've done one mortality survey so far. A second one will be happening in a couple months. Of the 3 species that seemed to fare the poorest were red alder, the valley ponderosa pine, and the lodgepole pine. I was a little surprised that the valley ponderosa pine did so poorly when that is adapted to wetter valley environments. The lodgepole was a little bit of a, this is the shore pine, not the eastern lodgepole, but the shore pine that also, usually does well on wetter sites. So a little hard to determine exactly what the reason for mortality were there. The red alder, I suspect, probably at frost damage. When we were planting, it was during a real cold snap, and alder is very sensitive to frost when you first plant it out, so that may have accounted for that. The cages also require a lot of maintenance. Again, I suspected this between the winds coming through, the elk and wildlife pulling them up, what have you. We've had to have crews come in twice so far and straighten the cages back up, put them back onto trees. It's just something you have to subject yourself to if you're going to use tree cages. And given the high mortality, just back to the mortality, we're likely going to be coming in now next winter and replanting some of the mortality sites. The highest mortality was in the open fields. Again, just high exposure, a lot of grass competition for soil moisture, in particular in late summer. And the lowest mortality rates were in the forested areas, a little more sheltered sites, more shady, and probably not as much moisture competition. And just a quick graph showing the mortality. And so you can see there the 3 species that experience the most mortality: the red alder, RA, the ponderosa pine, and lodgepole pine. And then we're a little uncertain about some of the other hardwoods out there. When we did the first mortality survey, the hardwoods hadn't quite budded out yet, and our forester wasn't able to identify between the quaking aspen and the ash, and maybe even some of the alder. So next time we do the mortality survey, we're going to make sure all the hardwoods have fully leafed out so they can be more easily identified. So the final project, a personal one for me, is on my own family's land, our Oakville forest. And I've got 3 different restoration projects going here, but I'm only going to talk about the pollinator habitat. But just to show you what I do have going on, the green polygon is a wildlife hedgerow that I planted, let's see, about 5 to 7 years ago. I replanted a couple times there. Got funding through EQIP to plant this. A whole mix of different trees and shrubs that produce berries and nuts. The orange polygon that might be a little bit harder to see on the left side of my property is actually a cultural resource plantation, all trees and shrubs that have documented Native American uses. I received funding through the Conservation Stewardship Program to put in about an acre of ethnobotanical trees and shrubs. That was just 3 years ago. And then this the yellow polygon rather, is my latest project, and that's the pollinator habitat project. And again, I've received CSP funding for that, Conservation Stewardship Program. And this is taking about an acre of my hay field and taking it out of hay production and putting it into pollinator flowers and herbs and forbs. And I'm trying 3 different experiments to see what's the most effective way of converting field grass to pollinator species. And so what those 3 different strategies are, the top orange section there, we will rototill about 5 times through the summer. The idea is to keep exposing the grass and the roots, and hope that through constantly tilling and exposing it to sun, that will kill off a fair portion of the grass. The second one in the middle, the yellow, we've taken a mini excavator and scraped all of the sod off down about 6 inches or so, so all the grass and its roots, and then we piled all of that on the lower section, the green area, and that we're going to use a process called solarization, which is basically saran wrapping that site with plastic. And a neighbor of mine raises cows, and he has a bunch of plastic left over from the silage bales that he makes. So we're able to recycle that plastic, and we'll be spreading that out shortly. So we've just finished the initial site preparation, and this is looking at the top, so you can kind of see the 3 zones. Just behind this bamboo stake is the first zone where it's been rototilled once so far. The second zone in the middle, you can kind of see the bare soil there, where again, that was scraped off with the excavator. That sod was put in the lower zone. And then in a couple of weeks here, I'll be taking plastic and wrapping that lower plastic area. And then the plan is this fall, we'll be broadcasting a pretty wide mix of pollinator plant seeds into that, and then watch which of those 3 kind of site preparation strategies are the most effective for creating a suitable environment for these pollinator plants. I fully expect it's within probably 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a lot of grass and other things coming back in there and competing with those pollinators. So the idea is really that it's going to be a fairly short-term pollinator site, and then the grasses likely will recolonize it, and we, depending on which of the 3 site preparation strategies work the best, then we may start over again. So it's kind of a learning process to see how this works and what the maintenance is like. So I think that's it for my examples there. And with that, I want to just open it up and see if either folks have any questions about these 3 projects, and or if you have any questions about your own wildlife projects, anything you want to talk about, sharing the anecdotes of your own. We don't have to stay focused on 3 projects that I just shared with you. If anybody has any questions or want to share their own wildlife stories, now is the time. And Lauren, were there any questions put into the chat first?
Yeah, there are a couple. So Scott asked, is there any concern that the oats planted in the glacial, cobble, or droughty soil will have enough nourishment to make a living long term? I haven't had much luck planting conifers in that type of poor soil.
Yeah, I suspect actually the oaks will do a lot better than the conifers will, for a couple of reasons. Oaks are really drought tolerant. So in the summertime, when all the water drains from the site, I think of all the species we have in the Northwest, they have the best likelihood of surviving the summer drought. They're also native, at least in our area, the Oregon white oak, Quercus garryiana, is native to these kind of rocky, cobbly riparian areas. My Oakville forest is near the town of Oakville, appropriately named because this is right along the Chehalis River, and the whole riparian area there is all the soils are glacial outwash, and that's where oaks really seem to find the most suitable habitat. So I'm fairly bullish, but your comment about the nutrients being denuded on that site because of the gravel mining. Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, that's another reason to put the wood chips in there is hopefully as they begin to decompose, they'll attract spores from mushrooms. We'll get some mycelium in there, starting to decompose those wood chips, and that of course will begin releasing some more nutrients over time. But we'll see. That's science.
And then another question is the solarization plastic clear or dark? I've heard clear plastic works better.
I've heard that too. In this case, I'm just working with what I have, and it is a an opaque plastic. You've probably seen this on the silage bales on farms. It's that white plastic that they wrap
Mhm.
the silage in. It's white on one side and black on the other, and I'm not entirely sure which side I'll have facing up. In one way, it makes sense to have the black facing up. That'll create a hotter environment underneath it. Maybe cook the roots of anything that's underneath there, seeds, what have you. I am working with the NRCS on this project and have an advisor there. So when I get to that point, I'm going to be asking them what their experience is with that kind of plastic. But one thing I really wanted to avoid was buying plastic for this project. There's enough plastic in this world, and so I went looking for billboard signs, that have been recycled. That definitely is a commodity, a hot commodity. They are incredibly expensive to buy used billboard plastic. And my neighbors happened to come along when I was on my land. He said, "Hey, I've got all this silage plastic that I've been just saving, apparently for you." And so he brought that up the other day, and always good to recycle.
Awesome. And then Lan Leslie asked, did you have the ability to add woody structures to the river?
No, not ourselves, but we started a conversation with the Thurston Conservation District, and this is one of those funny things where I designed this whole riparian reforestation project, just started getting going on it, and then I thought, well, gosh, I should reach out to the Thurston Conservation District, see if they have any advice. And it just turns out that literally on the next property downstream from where we're working, they were doing a massive riparian restoration project on private land there that included both planting the riparian area and installing woody debris jams. And so they asked if we would be willing to do the same thing, and I said, "Gosh, absolutely." And so that may be a future project where we collaborate with the conservation district to install some woody debris. Um, uh, there's a term for it. I forget what it is now. Dam. It's not dams. Woody debris. Anyway, chunklets, engineered wood into the stream. Richard, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so sort of a three-part question. One is I've realized as you've been going along that I'm trained to look for evergreen trees and Douglas fir because that's what I grew up with. And then you started talking about oaks, and I said, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So how do you decide between oak and evergreen? So I've got one area that seems like it's wet in the winter and dry in the summer. The second part of it is how do you water 5 or 10 or 15 acres? Because that's a lot of watering to do. And then the third part is just looking at the title on this of the wildlife side. What are you doing on these things to look at wildlife on, the first one or the other areas?
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, so how and when and where oaks? Uh, the main impetus for the oaks on this particular project was that I suspect historically before the site was mined for gravel that it was oak savanna. And again, looking downstream just a little ways, less than half a mile, there are native oak stands of oak. And so this is looking at a bigger landscape and trying to divine, what was this disturbed area like before it was disturbed, and trying to restore that kind of forest cover there. So that's one thing. The other is just also, knowing, okay, whether oak was endemic to that site, to a particular site or not. Will oak grow on a site if somebody wants to plant it? Thinking of your site, knowing it as well as I do, I think oak would do very well on your site. So that it comes back to the landowner's objectives. Oak is incredibly slow growing. It's not really where I put my money if I want to maximize carbon sequestration. It's not fast growing, not going to put on a lot of biomass, is not a bid for timber production. And so, in working with you and listening about some of your goals and objectives, I didn't see it initially as a good fit for your site, mostly because of goals and objectives. But I'll tell you, if you're interested in trying some oak, I would love it also. You got a very difficult site, obviously, to get trees established on. And, we could grab a couple dozen oaks and just see how they do. I would be inclined to plant them in a discrete area where they're not going to face competition with some of the other conifers that we plant. But I think it'd be fascinating to try oak in your area. I think it would do very well. Okay, so that watering. So this particular site's just, again, 2.5 acres, 250 trees. So not quite as bad. I don't think I'd be setting myself up to water, say, 40 acres or even 10 for that matter. But 250 trees, not so bad. And fortunately, the client has a large tractor and a big water tank, and they have staff that maintain their grounds, and so they're just going to work this into their work plan. Would I ask a small woodland owner who has a professional life or even a personal life to do this? No, probably not. We usually compensate for watering, for not watering by just overplanting and expecting mortality. So I'll be honest, I've never watered a single tree or shrub that I've planted. I've had a lot of mortality, but again, that's why we plant 600 trees per acre or 300 trees per acre. It's just to compensate for that mortality. And then by now I've forgotten your third question.
Third part
What
of wildlife.
Yeah. So for the Skookumchuck area, there is a lead biologist there that does, I think every other month they do wildlife surveys, and they're different species depending on the season. So that's already kind of baked into that project. However, we're also advised to partner with our local Audubon Society, as well as the local, and somebody else can tell me what the Latin for butterfly is, Leptoderma, is that right? Anyway, there's a local butterfly society also.
Lepidoptera.
Thank you. I probably referred to some appendage or organ in the body there. I don't know what I was saying, but you know what I meant. So, here's a chance to partner with a local, nonprofit that specializes, in wildlife, whether it's Audubon and birds or the L group that specializes in butterflies. And they'll likely come out or I'll ask them if they'd be willing to come out. If we invest in the restoration, will they be interested in sending out volunteers to do, wildlife surveys? And that'll supplement what the professional biologists are already doing as part of their contract on the site. For the pollinator up on my land, boy, I'm going to have to learn pollinator insects real quick, because that's not my forte. But yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Kirk, on the pollinator insect topic, I'd like to put in a little plug for the Washington Bee Atlas. It's a group sponsored by the Washington Department of Agriculture. And the group is trying to survey and identify all of the native bee species in the state of Washington. And if you sign up, you get trained, you get some fancy swag, vest and t-shirt, and you get to go around the state and try to identify all of the species of native bees that we have.
Oh.
It's a really good group, fun people, interesting people, and yeah, great field trips, and it's very, very worthwhile, and you just learn a ton. And if I could share my screen, I was gonna rats. Never mind. Let me get out. Anyway, I was going to show a native bee house that I slapped together here last weekend. And okay, let me try it again here. Okay, here we go. Is this showing up?
Yeah, sure
It
enough.
is.
Okay.
Very cool. Yeah.
So anyway, this will accommodate the cavity nesters, native bees. But interestingly, most of our native bees are ground dwellers, like yellow jackets. And by the way, yellow jackets are highly beneficial. They're a pain to deal with, but they eat tons of mosquitoes and other more pestilential insects. So one thing I've learned is it's important to not like cover ground, because that interferes with native bees' ability to nest in the ground, which is the most important source of nesting for native bees. So anyway, some of the things I learned with the Washington Bee Atlas. So I'd encourage everyone to go online, look it up, and consider getting involved if you have any interest in insects and pollinators.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think that's, especially with the pollinator habitat on my own land, I would love to be able to provide access to anybody who'd be interested in, monitoring that or bringing a little more of a professional overlay to it. So yeah, I'll look them up. That's a great tip.
And then we have, oh, sorry, what was that, Scott?
The Xerxes Society, which is headquartered down in Portland, is a really active and capable group that specializes in invertebrate ecology and preservation. And I wouldn't be surprised if they'd be willing to send somebody up to survey and consult on your property.
Great. Yep. Yeah, I'm aware of them. That's a good reminder. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. So Lorna Smith asked, does oak possibly bring in sudden oak death? Lewis County has the conditions to support. Or does Lewis County have the conditions to support?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the issue with sudden oak death, or I should say the one way to avoid it, of course, is to know the nurseries that you're acquiring the seedlings from and confirm that they have a policy for identifying and treating sudden oak death. And I'm forgetting now the botanical name of the pathogen, but it can be supported by numerous different trees and shrubs. So despite its name, it's not singular to oak trees. And so if you are, purchasing any kind of trees or shrubs, in particular ornamentals, make sure you do a little bit of due diligence and look into the nursery. That being said, just planting oaks by themselves, won't create an environment where the sudden oak death can come in. It's a pathogen that comes in on trees and shrubs that are already infected. So it's not endemic. It's not an endemic fungus. It's an introduced, and actually it's a bacteria, I believe. It's not or is it a fungus? I forget what the organism is, but it's not endemic. It's an introduced pathogen, and is spread again usually through poor nursery practices.
And then oh, sorry, what was that?
No, go ahead, Lauren. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Kit Ellis said, how about emerald ash borer? Is it already in this area?
I have not heard that it has come into Washington yet. I believe it's in southern Oregon now. and all predictions are that it's just gradually working its way north. I haven't looked at it yet, but WSU Extension did a special seminar. Excuse me, and you might be able to find that on the excuse me again, the Forestry Extension website. I believe Kevin Zobrist hosted that, and I need to look at that just to see what their predictions are. But my understanding is that it will eventually make its way to Washington, and the general prognosis is that it will be likely, entirely devastating to our Oregon ash. I'm continuing to plant ash trees. I mean, I'm just one of those chronically optimistic people, and hoping that somewhere in that genetic diversity of ashes, there may be some resistance to it. But the prognosis is that we may entirely lose that species to the ash borer, as has happened back east.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kevin suggested I not plant ash, even though it had been in an NRCS proposal, because I'm just enough north of the Olympia area that he could picture it being a jumping point or bringing it up here. So there may be some, it may have been found in Olympia already, but I don't remember. But Kevin Zobrist, I would go to if you want the up-to-date information. Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, it's interesting. My understanding of ash is that it's so ubiquitous. It's all the way up into Canada. So I would think that it's ubiquitous enough that you wouldn't really be able to isolate the borer, or further attract it by planting it. But that caused me to want to check into that seminar he did and ask him a little more about that. Maybe it's not advisable then to be planting ash, and I maybe I've made a mistake. But I think with that word of caution, I'll look into that before I advise other people to plant ash.
Well, it's always an experiment, and we just share the results.
Yeah, indeed. Yep, go science.
And then on another note, Lorna Smith also said that she's been hearing Who Cooks for You, the call of the barred owl.
Ah, yes.
Out there
Who
this
cooks for
evening.
you? Who cooks for you? Yeah, I've got barred owl on my Oakville land, and when I stay at the cabin, I frequently hear it in the woods. Love it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Does anybody else have their own wildlife habitat enhancement project that they want to share? I love the kind of peer-to-peer learning, and I love the opportunity myself to learn what other people are doing. Scott, thanks for sharing your bee houses there. I have a few mason bee blocks up at my house here in Olympia, but I haven't done anything extra special for bees down in on either of my forest lands, other than just creating more pollinator options.
Curiously, on the issue of the Trump funding freeze on NRCS projects, the NRCS employee that I've been working with said that pollinator projects, oddly, are not currently affected by the freeze, but timber projects are. So I had a thinning project that has been frozen, but a field enhancement for pollinators and for elk has not been affected. So it's kind of hard to understand how those things are treated differently. But anyway, you're right. The best part about those programs is the consulting that you are exposed to with people who are experts and just how to take on these projects. So I'd encourage anyone who has an interest in that area to reach out to your local NCRS employee and get some help.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. Might be a good place to wrap this up also, since I've been a strong advocate of the USDA funding programs for years. I've been a beneficiary. My family has funded the vast majority of our forest restoration projects through both EQIP and CSP. And we were talking at the very beginning of the Fireside chat that, and I just want to clarify what I understand is happened is that both EQIP and CSP are funded through two different funding channels. Historically, they've been funded through the Farm Bill, which gets renewed every 4 years, and more recently under the Biden administration, through the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot more funding was pumped into the USDA to fund these programs as well. So currently, EQIP and CSP projects that are being funded through the Inflation Reduction Act are being paused, or the funding has been frozen. But EQIP and CSP projects that are being funded through the Farm Bill are not. Right now, I've got a combination of projects, some funded through the IRA, some funded through the Farm Bill. So again, my IRA projects now are on hold. My Farm Bill projects are still good to go. And so that's where I suspect the difference is. It's not so much pollinator and timber, it's what funding source is funding those specific projects. And if your funding's been frozen, it means your contract was funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. So if any of you have current EQIP and CSP projects, and this is news to you, I highly suggest you contact your NRCS resource planner immediately to figure out what funding, what the source of funding is for your project and what the fate of that funding is. That's my cautionary tale at the moment. And if it is being either way, I would also, if you're an advocate of these programs, highly encourage you to contact your congressional and legislative representatives and let them know that this kind of funding is extremely important to small woodland owners and small farmers, and it's a great public investment for public benefits. So it's 8:30, and I'm happy to hang out for a little while. If anybody has any other questions or comments or political commentary for that matter, hey, I'm all ears and game. Otherwise, thank you again for joining us for our fireside chat, and we look forward to seeing you at future ones.
Lynn has one more question.
Yeah.
And said, what results have you enjoyed, if any, from habitat piles?
Ah, great. It's funny. I've been such a strong advocate of habitat piles for ages, but I have a very poor ability to monitor them for actual use. So it's a little hard to say exactly what kind of critters are using my habitat piles. I can speak more, kind of indirectly on this same at the Skookumchuck Wildlife Habitat Management Area. We built habitat piles and have put game cameras on them. And the funniest thing is that the elk love to rub themselves on the habitat piles. Now, I didn't envision the habitat piles providing habitat for elk. They're a little too big, to kind of burrow underneath them and stay warm. But they love to rub their rumps on them and their antlers on them. And then the cameras have also picked up all sorts of little Tweety birds, songbirds that use the habitat piles for cover. Beyond that, to be perfectly honest, I have not seen any of the small mammals that I would expect to be using them. But those are also very elusive. A lot of them are nocturnal. I need to put some game cameras on the habitat piles on my own land. So despite my evangelism about habitat piles, I have very little direct knowledge or experience of what the wildlife usage actually is. Sorry about that. All right. Well, if that's yep. Again, thanks folks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you at the next fireside chat. Have a good night, everybody.